Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome you back to our video series on intro syntax. We're going to pick up today, continuing our discussion of X-bar theory. So last time we sort of left off with some mysteries of X-bar theory, and I want to review there. Before we get into that, I want to do a couple of quick programming notes. I'm also teaching morphology this semester and working on a textbook under contract with Wiley-Blackwell. To support that, I'm going to also be recording a podcast. I'll be recording the first episode of that podcast later this afternoon, talking with Heidi Harley. That's going to both be as support for the course and also hopefully in the long term support for the book. Again, if it's helpful for anyone teaching morphology, great. If not, oh well. So I want to revisit a little bit of our X-bar rules. I managed to step on my chalkboard in between our last video, but I found this whiteboard in my closet. So woohoo, and maybe this is even a little bit easier to read. So as we talked about last time, we have 3 different rules, and I just wrote up the rules that we're using in English. We'll get to some cross-linguistic variation and how to use these rules in different languages over the next few videos. So we have our specifier rule here, and this is the rule that we're going to concentrate the most on today. So this is the rule that says an XP, a maximal projection, goes to an optional phrase, and again, that ZP is a variable, it can stand for anything, followed by an X-bar, which is that intermediate level. Then we have our adjunct rule, and again, can I get these? Yeah, you can see these. We have the phrase that says this is in English. We utilize both variants of these rules, and these are our intermediate projections, and they say an X-bar goes to another X-bar followed by a phrase, and this is in our verb phrases where we can get our prepositional phrases, our adverbial phrases. In a noun phrase, we can get things like prepositional phrases of various types, normally not an of phrase. You can get adjective phrases as well. So you can get these either following a bar level or preceding a bar level. And then we have our complement rule. And in English, complements follow the head. So we have our X bar going to a head, an X0, followed by, again, another phrase. And again, all of these Z's, W's, and Y's, they just stand for variables, so these could be any phrases. And the key with our X-bar rules is that the X is consistent across all of these different phrases. So the big challenge we were left with in our last video is the fact that we have these 3 rules, and we've seen, by and large, the complement rule in action, we've seen the adjunct rule in action, but we haven't really seen the specifier rule doing its work. So that's what I want to get to today. We're going to talk about 2 versions of the specifier rule, 2 examples of the specifier rule really doing some work, and we're going to modify our trees. So we're going to look at 2 problem cases. We're going to start off by looking at the noun phrase and some challenges with that. And then we will move on and look at the overall sentence. So right now, the way we think about a noun phrase, the way we project a noun phrase, and this is, again, we talked about this last time, is that we have something like a noun phrase. The specifier rule for a noun phrase basically is that it can go to an optional D followed by an N bar. So the problem with this is that it doesn't follow the logical consistency of the X-bar rules as written previously. The main problem is with this right here, this D, because that's just a lexical head, it's not a phrase. So there's a couple solutions we could propose for this. The big one is that we could just say, okay, well, let's just make this a maximal projection. Let's just make this D its own phrase. And that's probably the easiest solution we could give. It would make it consistent with our X bar rules. It would make it consistent, and we could just move on. So let's do that. Let's go ahead and try to do that, and let's see what we get. So maybe some natural objections we would get from that is, well, do we have any evidence that D is a maximal projection? We'll look at some evidence of that. And then, yeah. So it's not crazy to think that our functional items like D are project phrases. You know, we see these in our other functional items as well. So let's think about some of our potential functional items, or some of our evidence for D being a functional or having a maximal projection, something like a phrasal level. Well, if we think about our things that are determiners, we normally think of like things like the, maybe numerals, though there's evidence that it's, numerals may exist elsewhere. But one piece of evidence, I really shouldn't be touching my face right now. One piece of evidence that we may want to consider are things like possessives. So we can look at the distribution of possessives relative to other determiners, and we can notice that they don't seem to occur in the same position together. So you can't say the man's the book. You can say the man's book. You can't say the man's book, the book. So you can't get a determiner and a possessive together, and that's maybe evidence that these things are in the same syntactic distribution. So then that again, maybe that's evidence that that D head is being filled by that. And then if we think about that, well, maybe that's evidence of that possessive being part of that that category, and then we start to get evidence that maybe we have some sort of projection there. So if we draw a tree like that, so I'm going to say a noun phrase goes to a D. That D is going to contain our possessive. And then where are we going to put our the possessee, or the possessor, the possessor, well, the possessor maybe is going to occupy the specifier position, or that open position we have in our X bar tree of the D. We'll make it Seligman's book. No, that should really be a D bar. Cleaning this tree up. So we would end up with a tree something like this. And this is at least consistent with our X bar theoretic rules. We now are starting to get things occupying our specifier positions. Okay, great. That's at least consistent with our rules. But I want us to, again, we're working using scientific methods. We're working on using hypotheses and so forth. Are there any other ways we can test this type of tree? Well, last time we also talked about binding theory, and this type of structure is going to make particular predictions about the binding relations that will exist within this subtree. In particular, I can talk about Seligman's book about himself. And given this structure that exists, that should have a particular binding relation within it. And let's look at that. So I'm going to fill out this tree a little bit more. So here's the tree. Can we get it all on camera? There we go. Big thing to notice with this tree, and I apologize for my poor handwriting. Big thing to notice here, and I'm going to do my stand-up routine, not an actual stand-up routine. I'm not that funny. I wish I were. Is that Selicum here, which should be sub I, is not in a C-command relationship with himself. So Selicum does not C-command himself. I'm sorry, I don't have enough room here to really fill out the subtree containing this prepositional phrase, but the fact that it is dominated by this PP is sufficient for us to determine the C-command relations. Selicum is not going, the NP containing Selicum only C-commands this D bar and this D containing this S. And this therefore makes the wrong prediction about the binding relations within this sentence. It predicts that this sentence is or this subtree is ungrammatical, that Selicum's book about himself should not be grammatical. It shouldn't be, the binding relation shouldn't obtain, because himself requires that it be bound, that it be both co-indexed, which it is, but also that it be C-commanded, which it is not. So is there a way that we can correct this? Well, we're going to do something a little bit more radical. Rather than saying that the noun phrase is the head of a noun phrase, what if we said it's actually this DP, this D, that is really laying on top of this noun phrase? And that is what is creating, that's what creates the proper structure to give us the necessary C-command relations that we have. It's also going to give us the right sort of ordering relations that we want, and kind of capture the relationship that we want of a possessor-possessee relationship as well. Because notice the semantics of this don't really make a lot of sense if you think about this, but they will be a little bit clearer when we do it via this other structure. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to build our noun phrases following the same type of structure. So I'm going to use the same subtree, Selicum's book about himself. So here's our noun phrase as it's being built. And then on top of that, we're going to layer a new layer of functional structure, which is our determiner phrase. Okay, so here is our there we go. So what you can back up. There we go. So what you can see about this tree here is that now we have a layered DP on top of it. Also the DP containing celicum, which I triangled because all of our noun phrases will be DPs. But the key element is that it's going to, one of the key things it's going to do is it's going to properly capture the C command relations. Because now celicum, the DP containing celicum, C commands. So if we go up the tree, it's going to C command himself. Because it is in a sisterhood relationship with the D bar, and then that D bar dominates everything down this way. So himself is properly, or is bound and co-indexed. So this sentence, we get the right prediction from this structure, which is great. That's exactly what we want. The other thing that I really like about this structure is that it does a better job of capturing the semantic relations. And, you know, we can kind of dither back and forth about how important that is, but the fact is that we kind of want our specifiers and our complements to sort of encode some sort of semanticity. And this does a really nice job. That us, that's is marking a possessive relation. And here that specifier is saying, I possess, and that complement is saying, I am possessed. And that wasn't holding in our previous structure. So this new structure really does a lot of nice things for us that we weren't getting before. So the DP structure not only utilizes that the specifier rule of our XBAR rules that we weren't really utilizing before, it cleans out that problem, but it also helps us capture some challenging data that we hadn't been able to deal with before. As I said before, we're also going to look at one other example. This one's a little bit more straightforward in some ways. We're going to introduce this, and then we're going to start using this more and more to play with more complex stuff later on. But the other sort of weird rule we've had is we've sort of preserved our TP rule from our phrase structure grammars, which is we've had a rule that said we have a TP that can contain a noun phrase / complementizer phrase, an optional T, and a verb phrase. And, you know, this is all sorts of wrong for a XBAR theoretic tree. Like, this cannot be right. So we have to clean this up too. So, you know, there's a few things we have to do to make this work within a binary structure. And we also have to deal with this fact right here. This, the optional T. I can't get it. I can't point at it for whatever reason. So the fact that the T is optional is a real problem for us as well. So obviously we don't want optionality of the thing that is the primary like lexical label. That's not something we're going to want to hold on to. We're going to get rid of that. And the other thing that we want to get rid of is, you know, the fact that this is a potentially trinary branching structure. So the way we're going to do this is we're just going to utilize our XBAR theoretic rules. So the main contributions, or the main argument we're going to make, is that we're going to look at kind of two main arguments. the first one is going to go back to this, what we just did with the DP, which is that what is the role of a specifier? Well, in kind of like what we saw with the DP was that the specifier is sort of the one who does. And so we're going to kind of utilize that to sort of help us capture this this role in our TP. So we're just going to sort of slot into that. We're going to just sort of slot our TP into our XBAR rules, and we're going to move our subject into that specifier position. And really, our specifier rule is really, you can start thinking about this as a subject rule, basically. It's not always going to hold, but it's going to be a pretty good way of thinking about that. So we can take a sentence like, the dog barked. I'm just going to triangle the DP. So one of the challenges we're going to have is we have our subject here, the dog, in the specifier position of the TP. That's great. We're going to get our T-bar. But if we think about the sentence, the dog barked, what is the tense of that sentence? Well, we know it's past, because it's a past tense sentence, but it's not independently past. We can't encode that independently in the syntax. So the way we're going to deal with that for right now is we're going to mark a little null marker and just say, hey, this is in the past. And then our VP is going to be a complement of our tense. This will all become really important for us later on. We're going to start seeing interactions of the verb and tense in various ways, and interaction of tense and other things in various ways. So this really does become very important to us. I'm actually going to triangle the verb as well, mostly because I'm feeling lazy. But this is going to be the basic structure of our sentence going forward. Okay, so those are the two expansions to the XBAR theoretic rules that I wanted to cover today. There's a few other places that we still need to deal with these. The CP is another place that we still have to address. We will do that in a future video. We'll start thinking about questions. So that's something that I want us to still start thinking about. I'd also like to do a video of questions that you all have, where I try to answer them. That can be questions from students in the class. I've also been getting emails and other messages from folks who have been watching videos who are not in my class. So please feel free to shoot me questions if you have any. I'm more than happy to try to answer those. So I would like to do just a FAQ, syntax FAQ. Again, trying to keep to the level of the Carnie 3rd edition book. We're not going to debate the latest Chomsky paper in these videos. There's other forums to do that. So with that, I will stop for today, and hope you all enjoyed it, and hope to hear from you soon. All right, thank you.